Hello everybody, welcome back to Reaper Minis TV. Before we get into reviews for this episode, I wanted to give you a heads up about a line of figures from Reaper that goes along with a game of theirs that's in development. It's called Reich of the Dead, and there have already been some releases under the Reich of the Dead line, but there's 5 new ones for us to take a quick look at. First is Sergeant Mac Tory. He's a single-piece miniature, carries a submachine gun in one hand and a pistol in the other, and he looks like a really grizzled World War II fighter, very reminiscent of Sergeant Rock. Next is Corporal Mike Dana, and he's also carrying a submachine gun in his left hand, and he's pointing towards something off in the distance and yelling, probably yelling at the rest of the guys in the squad about enemies that are up ahead that he's spotted. He's in a slightly crouched position, probably trying to create less of a profile for the enemy to shoot at. Private Bob Hanks is next, and this is a 2-piece model. His rifle and right arm are a separate piece, and you'll have to glue that into place. And he's in a slightly downward firing position. He might be elevated above his enemy or shooting at somebody who's already been knocked down. Private Max Danworth is next, and another 2-piece model here. His right arm and sniper rifle are a separate piece, and he's in a position to be firing at a more level enemy off in the distance. And the last of these new releases for Reich of the Dead is Private Hernandez. Didn't have a first name listed, so I guess we're lucky that his last name wasn't Parts. And he comes with 4 pieces: the body, 2 arms, and a backpack. He takes a little bit longer to put together than the others, and he's much more crouched over than the others, sort of like he's sneaking up on somebody or maybe trying to get some extra cover behind a bush or a low wall or something like that. While you're waiting for the rules of Reich of the Dead to come out, you could get great use out of these guys in other games like Nuts or Secrets of the Third Reich or AEWW2. All of those are good games that use 28mm figures that these would be perfect for. Okay, on to our regular reviews now, and we have several Chronoscope blisters to take a look at. The first is Dr. Voodoo. He's a supervillain. He's a single-piece miniature that's holding up a chicken in one hand and a staff that's capped by a skull in his other hand. He's wearing a top hat and a jacket, but his chest and legs are bare. You can see he's got a grass skirt on, and he reminds me a whole lot of the voodoo bad guy from the James Bond movie Live and Let Die. Can't remember his name right now, but this guy, dead ringer for the character in that movie. Cleanup was limited to a few bits of flash here and there on the model and a faint mold line on the upper part of the arms and across the skull and the top hat of the model. And while he would do fine in the application he's sort of intended for as a supervillain in a superhero game like Champions, Mutants and Masterminds or something like that, you could also use him very effectively as a villain in a Call of Cthulhu game. Next up is Vermina, and she is dubbed as a Rat Queen, and she comes with 2 pieces. There's a special insert for the base that has some rats on it and some cobblestones, and then you have the rest of the model itself, which appears to be a little bit scantily clad from the waist down at least. It looks like she's wearing tights or some kind of very skin-tight leggings. She's also wearing a top hat, and it looks sort of like a cloak or a shawl, and both of them have really been chewed up and torn and are suffering from disrepair. She has long hair that goes down past the middle of her back, and while she's part of the Chronoscope line, which is a non-fantasy line of figures, I see her as a perfect rat catcher for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Here we have Alf-24. He's a robot assistant, and it's a single-piece miniature that required very little in the way of cleaning. There were a couple of tiny bits of flash from the casting process here and there, but really no discernible mold line that I could find of any significance. He would make, as you probably guessed already, a very passable C-3PO or similar type of droid if you're playing Star Wars or some other kind of space game, and a GM could use him very well as some kind of service droid in Paranoia if you're playing that. The details on the model are all very clean and easy to pick out. You can see all of the different armor plates, and in the midsection you can see some exposed wiring. In addition to the sci-fi uses that I mentioned earlier, you could also drop him into a superhero game as a sentient hero or villain maybe. It's a good model, but just one that you need to have a pretty specific use for. Next up we have a pair of female superheroes, and the first is Torrent, a water-based superhero, and you can see she's sort of shooting out of a pool of water that's down by her feet. She's wearing just a bikini, so there's going to be a lot of flesh to paint on the model, and I think painting her flesh in a non-standard color, like a seafoam green or something like that, would look pretty cool on this model. She has long flowing hair that goes down past the middle of her back, Cleaning was limited to some very faint mold lines on the thighs and on the inside of her arms, so she was ready to base and get primed in no time at all. The second of our new heroines is called Inferno, and she's sculpted in a way to suggest that she's flying with a column of fire trailing behind her. Her long and wavy hair sort of blends into the column of fire that's trailing her, so there's a neat effect there. She's dressed pretty scantily, just like Torrent was. She's got what looks like a bikini on, but she also has boots on and a mask, and Torrent didn't have a mask on. And she also appears to have some Wonder Woman-style bracelets around her wrists. Now, cleaning was a little bit more time-consuming with Inferno than with Torrent. Mold lines were a little bit more visible, and there were a couple extra bits of flash here and there on the model, but nothing that was too hard to clean up or marred the model in any way by the time I got it done. You have two really good superheroine models here, and even though one is sort of based around a fire theme and the other around a water theme, they could easily be painted up to look the opposite of the theme on their packaging. You could have Torrent as a fire-based heroine and Inferno as a water-based one, or you could do it completely differently and have sort of a purple and maybe green magic effect coming off of either one of them. So they're not sculpted specifically enough in what's written on the packaging to lock you into only painting them in that way. Next up we have a spy who's named Agatha Fox, and it's a single-piece miniature, and she required very little cleaning at all. And when my daughter looked at her, she immediately said, "Oh, there's a nice girl who's minding her own business." Well, that's good for a spy, but I guess my daughter didn't look behind and see the gun that she's pulling out of her handbag. So I think she fits the spy mode pretty well because she looks unassuming until you look behind and see the gun. And she's reminiscent of the old 60s TV show called The Avengers, a British spy TV show. You should go check it out. But she's not so locked into that genre that she couldn't fit as a modern figure if you were going to use her in D20 Modern or some other kind of game. And I could also see her being used as a player character in a Call of Cthulhu game, just as an investigator or some kind of reporter maybe, or something like that. Next we have an alien overlord model who's carrying some kind of tracking device. His right arm at the elbow and then down to his hand and the tracking device is a separate piece that's easily clipped off the casting tab and glued into place without any problem at all. His spacesuit, big bulbous brainy head, and backpack are sculpted to match up perfectly with a previous alien oppressor that's carrying a laser rifle that came out not too long ago. And I hope these two are a first in a series of alien models to come out. They would be really good in a tabletop superhero game like Pulp City, or in a regular superhero RPG like Champions or Mutants and Masterminds or what have you. They would also be really good in D20 Future, Traveler, any kind of space RPG you have as a good alien menace to use against the party. The only mold line I found was along the back of his right leg, and there was a little bit of cleaning needed on the hands, but otherwise he was ready to go in no time. And the last Chronoscope figure for this episode is going to be a female Andromedan hunter. This is a single-piece miniature, and you can see she's carrying a very heavy rifle in her right hand and pointing at something in the distance with her left. She's obviously of alien appearance, just like the other Andromedan vizier that we saw not too long ago. On her face, where her nose should be, it's more flattened than anything else, and you can see her feet have sort of like a bird-like quality to them. She's really not wearing much in the way of clothes. It's sort of like a sci-fi bikini top and G-string that she's got on. She's got a pistol holstered on her right side and also a pouch on her left side, but not really much else as far as equipment or adventuring gear is concerned. There is some nice detailing on the rifle itself. There's some filigree on the stock of the rifle and then along the long edge of it. I did need to take a little more time cleaning this model than some of the others this time around. There was a visible mold line along the rifle and then also along both of her legs. There was a little bit of flash that needed to be cleaned off of her left hand, but after a couple of minutes she was ready to base and get primed. I think the best use of this model is going to be as a player character in some kind of sci-fi game, and also I don't think it would be too much of a stretch to drop her into a Tau army for 40k. Just my opinion there. Could be wrong, but I think she'd make a nice unique feature to a Tau army. Okay, that's the end of the reviews for this time around. Wanted to do two quick things before signing off. First is to give you a reminder about ReaperCon that's coming up at the end of May. You can get more details at reapermini.com. And the second thing I wanted to do is give you a little bit of a blast from the past. You can tell by the code that the Demonic Lasher is not a recent release, and you can see it here. It's a large single-piece model, and if you say, wow, that looks a whole lot like Demogorgon from D&D, well, yeah, it looks a lot like it, but not too much like it. If you have a need for a Demogorgon Demogorgon in your D&D game, then this is the miniature for you. And also your party is a whole lot more robust than mine is right now. But also if you just have a need for a giant two-headed baboon Etten with tentacles, again, this is your model. And just to give you an idea of the size of the model, here's another Reaper model to size it up against. It's a very large model that would make an imposing enemy to any party. Alright, that's all for this episode. We'll see you next time.